Most CMMC implementations that fail an assessment don't fail because the controls were wrong. They fail because the boundary was wrong. The organization scoped too broadly and drowned in controls they didn't need. Or they scoped too narrowly and left CUI-touching systems completely unprotected. Either way, assessors find it. Either way, it costs you the contract. The boundary decision isn't a documentation step you do at the end. It is the first technical decision you make, and everything downstream depends on getting it right. This is the CMMC Advisor. This video is for IT managers, security managers, compliance leads, and consultants doing the actual implementation work. The question this video answers is specific. How do you define your CUI boundary correctly with a repeatable method before you deploy a single control or write a single SSP section? We will cover what CUI scope actually means under CMMC Level 2, how to trace the boundary through your environment, and the scoping mistakes that cost contractors the most during assessment. When you finish this video, you will have a method, not just a definition. Under CMMC Level 2, the assessment scope is not your entire organization. It is the environment that processes, stores, or transmits Controlled Unclassified Information, CUI, and any systems that provide security protection to that environment. That distinction matters enormously. If you scope too broadly, you bring systems into scope that have no contact with CUI. Every one of those systems now needs documentation, controls, and evidence. Your SSP, your system security plan, gets bloated. Your cost goes up. Your assessment surface grows. If you scope too narrowly, you leave real CUI exposure outside the boundary. An assessor who finds a CUI handling system you didn't document is not going to give you partial credit. That is a gap, and gaps against NIST 800-171 controls score against you in your SPRS, your Supplier Performance Risk System score. The SPRS score follows your organization. It affects your ability to compete for DoD contracts. So the boundary decision is not administrative. It is a business-critical, technical decision that determines your cost, your timeline, your assessment readiness, and your contract eligibility. And it must come before anything else. Here is the method. 4 layers of scoping decisions in order. Layer 1. Identify where CUI enters your environment. Start with your contracts and your customer communications. Your DoD Prime or agency is the authoritative source for what data is CUI. Look at your DD-254 CUI, the Contract Security Classification Specification, and any data handling instructions in your contract. If CUI has been shared with you, it arrived somewhere. Email, a secure portal, a file share, a collaboration tool. Document every entry point. Layer 2, trace where CUI travels. Follow the data from those entry points. Which endpoints open those files? Which servers store or process them? Which applications handle them? Does CUI move through your email system, your backup system, your ticketing system? If a system touches CUI, even in transit, it is a candidate for in-scope. Layer 3, identify security supporting systems. CMMC scope is not limited to systems that directly handle CUI. Systems that provide security functions to the CUI environment are also in scope. This includes your identity and access management infrastructure, your logging and SIEM, your security information and event management platform, your endpoint detection tools, your patch management systems. If those systems fail or are compromised, CUI protection fails. They are in scope. Layer 4. Define what is explicitly out of scope and document why. Out of scope is not assumed. It is argued. For a system to sit outside your CMMC boundary, you must demonstrate that it has no path to CUI and provides no security function to the CUI environment. That argument needs to be documented in your SSP. If there is a network path, even an indirect one, between an out-of-scope system and an in-scope system, an assessor will ask about it. Segmentation controls need to support that claim. The practical tool for this work is an asset inventory mapped to data flows. You need a diagram that shows CUI entry points, data flow paths, and system boundaries, not just a list of assets. The diagram and the narrative in your SSP must tell a consistent story. If the diagram says one thing and the control implementation says another, assessors notice. Here is where the scoping work breaks down in practice. Mistake 1. Defining the boundary based on what you want to protect instead of what actually touches CUI. This is very common. An IT manager knows the file server is the primary CUI location, so they scope the file server and stop. But the endpoints that access the file server, the authentication system validating those logins, the backup solution pulling those files nightly, those systems are in scope 2. Scoping based on intent rather than data flow leaves real exposure undocumented. Mistake 2. Treating shared services as automatically out of scope. Organizations often share infrastructure between their CUI environment and their general corporate environment. Shared Active Directory, shared email, shared DNS. When that happens, the shared service is generally in scope, or it forces a segmentation conversation that the organization was not prepared for. You cannot share authentication infrastructure between a scoped CUI environment and an unscoped corporate environment without a very clear, technically defensible argument. Most organizations cannot make that argument without architectural changes. Mistake 3. No documented rationale for out-of-scope decisions. Leaving systems out of scope without written justification in the SSP is an immediate flag during assessment. Assessors will ask, why is this system not in scope? If the answer lives only in someone's head, that is not sufficient. Every out-of-scope determination needs a documented rationale tied to data flow evidence and segmentation controls. Mistake 4. Using the same boundary definition for CMMC planning that you used for a previous compliance effort. CUI scope under NIST 800-171 and CMMC has specific definitional requirements. A prior SOC 2 scope, ISO 2701 scope, or internal security perimeter is not automatically the right starting point. Start from the CUI data flow, not from a prior scope document. Mistake 5. Defining the boundary once and not revisiting it. Environments change. New tools get deployed. New contracts add new CUI categories. A system that was correctly out of scope 18 months ago may now have a path to CUI. Boundary review needs to be a documented, recurring process, not a one-time project deliverable. Here are the concrete steps to define your CUI boundary correctly. Step 1. Pull your contracts and your DD-254. Identify every CUI category you are handling and every data delivery mechanism your customer uses to share it with you. This is your ground truth. Step 2. Build a CUI data flow diagram. Start from every entry point you identified and trace CUI through your environment to every system that stores, processes, or transmits it. This diagram becomes a required artifact in your SSP. It needs to be current and accurate at assessment time. Step 3. Extend the boundary to security supporting systems. Review your identity infrastructure, your logging systems, your endpoint security tooling, your patch management, and your backup systems. For each one, document its relationship to CUI protection and make a scoping decision. Step 4. Document every out-of-scope determination. For each system excluded from scope, write the rationale in your SSP. Reference the segmentation controls or the absence of a data flow path that supports the exclusion. This documentation is what an assessor will review. Step 5. Validate the boundary against your network segmentation. The boundary you document must match the network architecture you have implemented. If the SSP says 2 environments are isolated, your firewall rules and VLAN configuration need to prove it. Gaps between documentation and technical implementation are where assessments break down. Step 6. Schedule a recurring boundary review. Build a process to reassess scope at least annually, or whenever significant architectural changes occur. Document the review and any changes as part of your SSP maintenance. Those 6 steps give you a defensible, repeatable scoping method. The CUI boundary is not a document you produce after the implementation work. It is the decision that defines what the implementation work is. Get it wrong, and you either overbuild an environment that costs more than it needs to, or you underscope and walk into an assessment with unprotected CUI exposure. If you want the CUI boundary scoping worksheet, drop boundary in the comments and we will send it your way. The link is also in the description. Either way works. Boundary in the comments. This worksheet gives you the structured template to document your data flow analysis, your scoping decisions, and your out-of-scope rationale in a format that maps directly to your SSP. One important reminder, CMMC requirements evolve. Verify all specifics, including scoping guidance, control requirements, and assessment procedures against current official guidance from the DoD and the CMMC accreditation body before making implementation decisions. Know what touches your CUI. Document why everything else doesn't. That is where every successful CMMC implementation starts.